My name is Eveline Rowan, and at 69, I thought I'd finally learned how to live without surprises. I liked quiet mornings by the harbor, black coffee with honey, and the slow peace that comes after years of surviving alone. People said I had a calm temperament, and maybe that was true until that morning at the Charleston cruise terminal, when everything I believed about family unraveled with one text message. The air was thick with salt and sunscreen. Families hurried past me, dragging bright suitcases, their laughter tangled in the gulls' cries. I stood there in my pale blue linen dress, the one Clarice helped me pick out, clutching my boarding pass and straw hat. My daughter had planned this cruise for months, a multi-generational getaway, she'd said, smiling as if to heal the distance that had quietly grown between us. I had spent the week before packing small gifts for my granddaughter, Mira, and a book for Clarice. I thought she'd like boundaries and the heart. At 10:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Clarice. Plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. It's for family only. I blinked once, twice, unsure if I'd read it right. The words looked wrong, like they belonged to someone else's life. I typed nothing. Around me, engines hummed, children squealed, and somewhere above the noise, the ship's horn sounded. When I lifted my head, I saw them. Clarice, my only child, was on the upper deck with Rhett and little Mira, waving at someone below. Rhett's arm rested casually around her shoulders. Mira held a balloon. They didn't look down. Maybe they didn't see me. Or maybe they did. A slow heat spread across my chest, shame and disbelief woven together. I forced my face to stay still, my hands steady on the suitcase handle. There was nothing left to do. I turned away from the water, from the ship, from the sound of families leaving together. The taxi driver asked where I was headed. I gave my address automatically. As the car pulled away, the port vanished in the rearview mirror, a blur of white hull and bright banners. I didn't know it yet, but the drive home would lead me to something buried in my desk drawer, something that would change everything that came after. The ride back to my apartment felt longer than it ever had. The driver hummed to an old country tune, unaware that the woman in the back seat was trying not to fall apart. When the taxi stopped in front of my building, the familiar scent of jasmine from the courtyard hit me like a memory I wasn't ready to face. My small apartment overlooked Charleston Harbor, a view I used to find comforting. That morning, it only reminded me how far the water could stretch between people who once shared everything. I set my suitcase by the door and sat on the couch without taking off my shoes. The quiet pressed against my ears. No ship horns, no laughter, only the hum of the refrigerator and the dull pulse in my chest. I reached for the nearest distraction, a stack of mail, then a photo frame half buried beneath it. Clarice and Rhett, smiling on the porch of their pale yellow house. The house I bought them. I stood, crossed the room, and opened the old filing cabinet under my desk. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in years, blue, a little frayed at the edges. The label read, Montrose Residence. I opened it carefully. There it was, the deed, stamped and notarized, still bearing my name, Eveline Rowan. My signature was the only one that mattered. I traced the ink with my fingertip, remembering the day I'd handed Clarice the keys. She had hugged me so tight then, tears bright in her eyes, promising they'd pay me back someday. 5 years ago, Rhett's firm had nearly gone under. I'd used my savings to secure their mortgage, telling myself it was what mothers did. My lawyer, Mr. Henley, had warned me gently, don't rush to transfer ownership, not until you're sure. I'd smiled then, certain I was. Now those words returned, steady and cold, cutting through the ache. Outside, the harbor shimmered with late light, indifferent and endless. I closed the folder, set it on the desk, and breathed in slowly. For the first time all day, I didn't feel powerless. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat by the window, watching the tide crawl up against the harbor wall, the city's lights trembling in the water. Every small sound from the street below, distant laughter, a car door closing pulled loose. Another memory I'd tried not to look at too closely. The distance between Clarice and me hadn't happened overnight. It began quietly, almost politely, in the form of shortened phone calls. "Mom, I can't talk long, Mira's bedtime. Or we'll visit next week. Promise." The visits grew fewer when I dropped by unannounced once. She smiled tightly, whispering that Rhett needed peace to work. And then, the words that settled like dust in my chest. "Mom, we need our own space." I thought of that Christmas 3 years ago, the one where I brought homemade pralines and new pajamas for Mira. They had rearranged the living room for a photo shoot. All matching sweaters and a tripod blinking red. I'd sat on the far end of the couch, waiting to be called into the frame. Clarice had said, "Let's just do one with the three of us first." There was never a second one. The clock read 11:47 when I reached for my phone and scrolled to Mr. Henley, attorney. My thumb hovered for a moment before I pressed call. His voice, deep and patient, hadn't changed in years. "Eveline, are you all right? I need to know," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If a house is still legally mine, can I sell it without the occupant's consent?" He paused only a moment. "If the deed remains in your name, yes, absolutely." I thanked him and hung up, the silence that followed heavy as confession. Justice or revenge, what line separated them? I wasn't sure anymore, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever came next would no longer be decided by those who called me too much while taking everything I gave. 2 mornings later, I drove across the Ashley River Bridge toward the neighborhood I had once called my second home. The air carried the scent of salt and magnolia, and the sunlight fell in a way that made Charleston look almost forgiving. But my hands stayed tight on the steering wheel. Clarice and Rhett were still at sea. I knew because Mira's babysitter had posted a picture of the cruise ship online, my granddaughter grinning in a straw hat that I had bought her. Their street was quiet, lined with crepe myrtles in bloom. When I parked in front of the yellow house, Mrs. Alden from across the road waved. "You keeping an eye on things while they're away? Miss Rowan?" she called. I smiled faintly. "Just watering the plants." The key fit easily into the lock. Inside, the air was cool and faintly lemon-scented. The living room looked cleaner than I remembered, too clean, stripped of warmth. On the walls, new frames had replaced old ones. Clarice and Rhett at fundraisers, beach photos, a magazine-style portrait of the three of them. In none of them was I present. On the shelf, the ceramic bowl I'd made years ago in a pottery class was gone. The family quilt I'd sewn when Mira was born was folded in a plastic bin, tucked behind a vacuum cleaner in the hallway closet. Each discovery felt like a quiet erasure, deliberate and practiced. In Rhett's office, the air smelled faintly of paper and mint. I opened a desk drawer, searching without purpose, until an envelope caught my eye white, marked with their lawyer's letterhead. Inside lay a draft titled Transfer of Property Agreement, dated 2 months earlier. My name appeared only once the current owner expected to relinquish title upon final mortgage completion. The space between the lines said more than the ink ever could. They had planned this, down to the timing, down to the silence. I placed the document back where I found it, smoothed the paper, and closed the drawer. For the first time in years, the house felt like what it truly was mine, yet no longer home. By the time I reached home that afternoon, the decision had already taken shape, steady, quiet, and absolute. I didn't make lists or weigh consequences. I simply opened my phone and searched for a name I hadn't dialed in years. Tara Valen, I said when she answered. My voice sounded calm. Even to me, I need to sell a house. Quickly. Tara had been a friend from my teaching days at the college, sharp, honest. The kind of woman who could close a deal before you finished your coffee. Yours, she asked. No, but it's in my name. She didn't press for details. Send me the address. I'll handle the rest. Within 3 days. She called back with news that felt both surreal and inevitable. I have a couple from Savannah retired teachers. Like you. They fell in love with the house the moment they saw it. Teachers, I repeated softly. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next morning, I met Tara and Mr. Henley at his office, the old brick building off Meeting Street where I'd signed so many other papers over the years. Wills, leases, life insurance forms. This one felt heavier, though it weighed the same as any contract. Mr. Henley slid the documents across the polished table. Everything's in order. Eveline, you're within your rights. His tone carried both approval and warning, as if he understood what this sale meant beyond the legal. I read each page carefully, then took the pen. My hand didn't tremble. When the ink dried, something in me loosened. A small thread snapping free. After they left, I remained at the table, staring at the blank corner of the last page. I pulled a scrap of stationery from my bag and wrote a single line before folding it into my journal. I'm not selling a house. I'm selling the illusion I built. Outside, Charleston's afternoon light spilled across the cobblestones, warm and indifferent. I walked home slowly, the sound of my footsteps steady, carrying both the weight of loss and the strange lightness of release. The house looked different in the half-light of dawn, emptier, softer, stripped of noise and pretense. The buyers would receive the keys in less than 24 hours, and by then, Clarice and Rhett would still be somewhere between Nassau and Miami, blissfully unaware that their version of home was already changing shape. I walked through each room slowly, checking that everything personal was gone. In the kitchen, I laid 2 envelopes on the counter, one addressed to Clarice and Rhett, the other to Mr. Henley. The first contained my letter, the second, the storage receipt and forwarding details for their belongings. The letter had taken me 2 nights to write. I kept it factual and clear. Every word, deliberate. Clarice, Rhett. The house has been sold. The title remained in my name, and I chose to let it go before it became a monument to what we've lost. Your things are safely stored for 3 months. Paid in full. Mr. Henley will assist with any arrangements you need. I'm not angry. I'm not vengeful. I simply need the same space you once asked for to rediscover who I am, beyond the roles I've played. Take care of Mira. She deserves a life built on honesty, not obligation. Eveline. I placed the letter neatly beside the storage key, aligning everything in quiet order. For a long moment, I stood still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rush of the tide beyond the window. Then, on a small impulse that felt like defiance and freedom all at once, I turned on the old Bluetooth speaker Rhett had left behind. Aretha Franklin's voice filled the empty house, warm, rich, and alive. I let the music carry me, my bare feet sliding across the wooden floor, the air smelling faintly of lemon polish and salt. When the song ended, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped outside. The sky above Charleston Harbor was beginning to pale, streaked with gold. I walked toward my car without looking back. The pounding started just after sunrise. 3 sharp knocks, then silence, then another harder this time. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. Clarice stood in the hallway, hair pulled back, eyes swollen and red. Her voice cracked the moment I opened the door. You sold our home? It was never yours, I said quietly. She pushed past me into the apartment, the smell of sea air and perfume clinging to her clothes. How could you do this, Mother? Without even telling us the neighbors saw movers, our things are gone. I let her speak. The fury poured out of her like a storm, words tumbling over tears. When she stopped to catch her breath, I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out the paper I had kept, creased, but intact. This, I said, handing her the unsigned draft. 3 months ago, you planned to take the house. You just didn't get the timing you wanted. Clarice stared at the document as if it might burn her fingers. That wasn't what you think. Rhett, he just thought it was time to make it official. Official, I repeated. Or convenient. Her lip trembled. But she didn't answer. The silence between us was heavy, full of years we could never reclaim. Finally, she sank into the nearest chair, face hidden in her hands. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered. I just needed space. So did I said, my tone soft but unwavering. You asked for boundaries. I respected that. Now I'm keeping mine. She lifted her head, eyes shining with grief and disbelief. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. Not anymore. I won't teach you respect again by losing mine. Clarice left without another word. The door closed gently behind her. And for the first time in years, the quiet that followed didn't hurt. A month later, I stepped off a plane into the sharp brightness of Marseille. My sister Luciane met me at the arrivals gate, her perfume mingling with the scent of salt and diesel from the nearby port. She looked almost the same as she had decades ago. Silver hair pinned neatly, eyes still quick with mischief. You look thinner, she said, studying me with the blunt honesty only sisters can manage. But freer. Her apartment overlooked the harbor, a jumble of masts and gulls and open sky. Each morning we walked along the water, buying croissants from the same vendor who called me Madame Américaine and always slipped me an extra slowly. My body learned the rhythm of this new life coffee at sunrise, paintbrushes by noon, the Mediterranean breeze soft as forgiveness. Luciane introduced me to her friend André, who taught watercolor to retirees at a studio tucked behind a florist shop. The first time I tried to paint, the water ran wild across the paper, swallowing the colors. I sighed, ready to crumple it up, but André stopped me with a quiet smile. Don't fight it, he said, guiding my hand. Watercolor is like life, you can guide it, but you can never control it. I carried those words home, letting them echo long after the paint had dried. Some evenings I checked my email messages from Clarice, each one shorter, more careful. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry anymore, just unwilling to return to a life that had no room for me. The days stretched gently, marked by small discoveries, a cafe that played old jazz records, a street artist who painted doors instead of canvases, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I was no one's mother, no one's provider, only myself, learning to breathe again. The email arrived just after dawn, when the first light was filtering through the lace curtains of Luciane's kitchen. The subject line read, "From Clarice, please read." For a long moment, I didn't move. My tea cooled beside me as I finally clicked it open. Her message began without formality, the words tumbling out in raw confessions. She wrote that she and Rhett were in therapy, now marriage counseling, but also something deeper. I used to think I was just setting boundaries, she admitted, but really, I was building walls. I wanted your help, your money, your presence, just not your voice. You became invisible because I made you that way. Each paragraph felt like both a wound reopened and a balm applied. She spoke of the guilt that had kept her awake at night, how Rhett had broken down during one session and admitted he'd treated me like a convenience, not a person. We both did, she wrote. We both used your love as a currency we thought would never run out. I read her email 3 times, maybe 4. The first time in disbelief, the second with anger softening, the third with something close to relief. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything, but it was honest. That evening, I sat at my small desk overlooking the harbor and began to write back. Clarice, I've read your letter with a full heart. I'm healing slowly, quietly, and in my own way. I wish you the same peace you're seeking. Some distances exist, not out of spite, but to let love breathe again. Mom, no blame, no promises, just truth, wrapped in calm. When I finished, I set up my easel by the window. Outside, the sea had gone still after a morning storm. I dipped my brush into pale gray and soft blue, painting water so calm it seemed to hold its breath. I titled it, Still Water After the Storm. It felt like a closing gentle, not final, the kind that lets the heart rest without needing to forget. Spring returned to Charleston with its soft salt breeze and the sound of gulls sweeping low over the harbor. I had been gone nearly a year, yet the city greeted me as if time had folded itself neatly in my absence. The pastel houses still leaned toward the sea. The air still carried that mix of magnolia and memory. Clarice chose the cafe by the water, a place we once passed on our walks when she was a teenager. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table near the railing, her posture uncertain, but her smile real. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stood, and we embraced, not tightly, but long enough to know something had changed. We ordered tea, the same kind I used to brew at home on quiet Sundays. The conversation drifted easily, without rehearsed apologies or guarded tones. She told me about therapy, about how she and Rhett were learning to rebuild rather than repair. I told her about the art classes, the exhibitions in Marseille, and the small studio I now rented near the Battery. You seem peaceful, she said at last. I am, I answered. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's learning where to set it down. When the check came, I reached into my purse and placed a tiny red key charm in her palm. It caught the light like a drop of sunset. To remind us, I said, that doors mean nothing without respect on both sides. Her eyes shimmered as she closed her fingers around it. No words followed. None were needed. Outside, the wind lifted gently off the water, carrying the scent of spring and second chances. As I walked away, I thought of everything that had led us here. Grief, silence, distance, and finally, understanding. Love had built me. Boundaries had saved me. And both, at last, could coexist.